Hey everyone, I thought I'd share a pretty intense experience I had while camping last summer. It's one of those stories that you never think will happen to you until it actually does. My buddy Mike and I decided to take a trip out to the National Forest, a place known for its sprawling wilderness and minimal human interference. We were both looking forward to some peace, far from the noise and chaos of city life. We packed our gear, tents, sleeping bags, cooking supplies, and, of course, some emergency stuff like a first aid kit and a map. We thought we were pretty well prepared. We arrived at our designated campsite by late afternoon. It was perfect, secluded, with a clearing near a small river, surrounded by dense trees. We set up our tent and decided to explore the area a bit before it got dark. The scenery was stunning, with the river gently flowing and the forest alive with the sounds of wildlife. It was serene, just what we needed. After a bit of exploring, we headed back to our campsite to start a fire and cook some dinner. That's when things started to get weird. As we were cooking, we heard noises in the bushes nearby. Thinking it was probably a deer or some small animal, we didn't pay much attention to it at first. But then the rustling grew louder, more deliberate, like whatever was out there was moving towards us. Feeling a bit uneasy, we grabbed our flashlights and shone them towards the bushes. The light caught a pair of eyes that quickly disappeared as the rustling stopped. We were a bit freaked out, but tried to brush it off as a curious animal, maybe a raccoon or something. We finished our dinner, cleaned up, and decided to get some sleep, hoping the rest of the night would be peaceful. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the tent. Not the light steps of an animal, but heavy, human-like steps. I nudged Mike, and he heard it too. We lay there in silence, holding our breaths, listening as the footsteps circled around our tent. It felt like an eternity before they finally stopped. We didn't dare to go out and check. The fear was too real. Neither of us slept much after that. At dawn, we cautiously stepped out of our tent. The first thing we noticed was that our stuff outside, our cooler, backpacks, and utensils, had been rummaged through. Some of our food was missing, and Mike's knife was gone. That freaked us out even more because it confirmed that someone, or some people, had been at our campsite. We decided to pack up and leave as soon as we could. As we were packing, we noticed something else. Footprints around our campsite, definitely human, and not just from one person. We didn't bother to find out more. We just wanted to get out of there. On our way back, we kept looking over our shoulders, the sounds of the forest now seeming ominous. We reported the incident at the ranger station once we got back to civilization. They told us that there had been similar reports recently, likely drifters or people trying to live off the grid. They would investigate, but there wasn't much they could do except warn campers to be cautious. The whole experience shook us up pretty badly. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, and it turned into a nightmare. I'm just thankful we got out of there without confronting whoever it was. I had gone solo once, seeking some solitude and a break from the hectic pace of my daily routine. I chose a somewhat remote trail known for its breathtaking views and rigorous hiking paths, deep in a state park. I arrived early in the morning, eager to set up camp before embarking on a day hike. The campground was pretty basic, just a few cleared areas scattered among towering pines, and it was surprisingly empty. I figured I'd have the place mostly to myself. After setting up my tent and securing my belongings, I took a trail map from the nearby ranger station and started on what was marked as a moderate 4-hour loop. The hike was beautiful but strenuous, and it took more out of me than I expected. By the time I was heading back, the sun was starting to dip low, casting long shadows through the trees and making the trail harder to follow. I realized too late that I had missed a turn somewhere and was now potentially lost. The trail markers had become sporadic and confusing. Some looked old and unattended, and others seemed to lead nowhere. As the woods grew darker, a mild panic set in. My cell phone had no signal, and while I had brought basic supplies, I hadn't planned for an overnight trek in the wilderness. I pushed on, hoping to find a familiar landmark or at least a spot to safely wait out the night. That's when I heard it, a distant, plaintive cry. It was faint, more like a whimper than a shout, and it chilled me to the bone. I stopped, straining my ears, wondering if I was imagining things. But then it came again, a definite sound of distress. My first thought was that someone else was lost, maybe hurt. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No response. I debated whether to go towards the sound or continue trying to find my way back. My decision was made for me when the cries grew more desperate. I turned towards them, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. I must have walked a half-mile or so before I found the source. A small dog, caught in an old, rusted bear trap hidden among some thick bushes. The poor thing was in bad shape, whimpering in pain every time it moved. I approached cautiously, speaking softly, not wanting to scare it more. With a bit of effort, I managed to release the trap, though I could tell the dog's leg was badly injured. Knowing I couldn't leave it there, I fashioned a makeshift sling from my backpack and carried the dog back the way I thought I had come. By sheer luck, I stumbled onto the right path and made it back to my campsite just past midnight, exhausted but grateful. The next morning, I brought the dog to the ranger station. They recognized it immediately. It belonged to a hiker who had gone missing weeks earlier. The rangers were able to reunite the dog with its family, though the hiker had never been found. The rangers thanked me, saying the dog probably wouldn't have survived another night out there alone. Last fall, I decided to take a solo camping trip to a well-known state park. It was off-season, so I was looking forward to some quiet time, just me and nature. The area was beautiful. Miles of hiking trails, a large lake, and dozens of campsites that promised a serene getaway. I arrived mid-morning, set up my tent at a site that was nicely tucked away by a small hill, and prepared for a day of hiking and photography. The weather was perfect, crisp, and slightly overcast, great for pictures. I spent the day exploring, taking photos of the changing leaves and the wildlife. By the time I got back to my campsite, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I started a fire, cooked some dinner, and settled in with a book. But as the night grew darker, a sense of unease began to set in. It was the kind of silence that felt too thick, too complete. Occasionally, a branch would snap in the distance, breaking the stillness, making my heart race. Around 9 p.m., I heard something, voices. I paused, listening more intently. It sounded like a couple of people talking, their voices low and urgent. They were close, maybe just a few sites over. Curious, I decided to check it out, thinking maybe other campers had arrived while I was out hiking. I walked towards the sounds, but as I approached, the voices abruptly stopped. I reached the site where I thought I'd heard the talking, but it was empty. No tent, no fire, no signs of anyone. Maybe I'd gotten turned around? Feeling a bit foolish, I decided to head back to my campsite. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to take a different route back, circling around to see if there were any other campers nearby. That's when I stumbled upon it. An old, half-collapsed tent covered in leaves, like it hadn't been touched in years. It was Eerie, standing there, seemingly forgotten. My curiosity got the better of me, and I approached to take a closer look. Inside, everything was still there. A sleeping bag, a backpack, and even a pair of boots. It looked like someone had set up camp and then just vanished. Suddenly the air grew cold, and the earlier voices whispered through my mind. I felt a chill run down my spine. I quickly took some pictures with my phone, thinking the rangers should see this, and hurried back to my campsite. I packed up my gear with shaking hands, no longer feeling safe or welcome. I hiked back to my car in the darkness, guided by the beam of my flashlight and the urgent need to leave. The next day, I showed the pictures to the park rangers. They were as baffled as I was. They knew about the missing camper from a couple of years back, but they'd never been able to locate his campsite or any of his gear. The site I'd found matched the description of what he'd been using. They launched a new search based on my information, but as far as I know, they never found any trace of the camper. It's haunted me ever since. How easily someone could disappear, how quickly nature could swallow up any sign of their existence. This happened a few years ago, when I decided to take a long weekend trip to a remote part of the national forest. It was just me and my dog Cooper, a sturdy retriever who loved the outdoors as much as I did. We headed out early in the morning, excited for a few days of fishing and hiking. We arrived at our campsite around noon, a secluded spot near a small lake. The forecast had been clear for the weekend, and the sky was a brilliant blue as we set up our tent and unpacked. After a light lunch, we took the canoe out on the lake, enjoying the peaceful water and the occasional fish tugging at our lines. As evening approached, we returned to shore and I started a fire. Cooper played nearby, occasionally coming over to nudge me for some attention. We had dinner, and I settled into my chair with a book while Cooper dozed by the fire. It was idyllic, the kind of evening you wish could last forever. But then the wind picked up. At first, it was just a gentle breeze, but it quickly grew stronger. I looked up from my book, noticing for the first time that the sky had turned a deep, menacing gray. Clouds rolled in fast, much faster than I expected. Within minutes, the wind was howling, and the first drops of rain began to fall. I scrambled to secure our gear and cover the fire, while Cooper barked anxiously. We retreated to the tent just as the rain turned into a torrential downpour. Thunder boomed overhead, and lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the lake in brief, intense bursts. The storm raged for hours. I lay awake in the tent, trying to stay calm. But the wind was so loud it sounded like it could rip the fabric right off. Cooper was restless, pacing and whining. Then, in a brief lull in the noise, I heard something else. Voices. They were faint, almost drowned out by the storm, but I was sure I heard someone shouting. Concerned, I opened the tent and peered out. I couldn't see much, just the beam of my flashlight bouncing off the raindrops. But the voices came again, closer this time. I called out, "Hello? Do you need help?" There was no response, just the wind and the relentless rain. Then, as quickly as it had started, the storm began to ease. The rain slowed and the wind died down. As the sky cleared, I ventured out with my flashlight. Cooper stayed close, his ears perked up. We followed the sound of the voices until we came upon another campsite not far from ours. It was a mess. Tent collapsed, gear scattered everywhere. 2 hikers were there, looking drenched and miserable but alive. They had been caught unprepared for the storm, their tent unable to withstand the wind. I helped them gather their belongings and invited them back to my campsite, where their tent was at least still standing. We spent the rest of the night sharing our supplies and stories, grateful that the storm had passed and that everyone was safe. In the morning, the sky was clear again, as if the night's terror had been nothing but a bad dream. But the damage to their campsite and our frayed nerves were proof enough of how real it had been. It was supposed to be a routine weekend camping trip with a couple of friends from college. We chose a secluded spot in an old valley known for its scenic views and lush hiking trails, but not frequently visited due to its somewhat difficult accessibility. It seemed like the perfect getaway from our busy lives. We arrived late Friday afternoon, excited for a couple of days in the wilderness. The campsite was more remote than we expected, nestled at the base of a steep hill and surrounded by dense woods. It took some effort to get our gear down the narrow path, but the isolation felt worth it. As we set up our tents and started a fire, everything seemed perfectly normal. We cooked dinner, shared stories, and enjoyed the clear night sky. But as we were about to call it a night, we heard a strange noise, a sort of metallic scraping sound coming from the hillside above our campsite. Curious and a bit unnerved, we shone our flashlights up the hill but couldn't see anything. Assuming it was just some wildlife, we tried to dismiss it. However, the sound persisted, intermittent but always jarring, disrupting the quiet of the night. Eventually, we managed to fall asleep, attributing the noise to the unknown quirks of the wild. The next day, we went hiking up the hill from where the sound had seemed to originate. The forest was thick, making our progress slow. About an hour into our hike, we stumbled upon something unexpected. An old, rusted-out car, half buried in the underbrush, clearly there for decades. It was a startling sight, the car so out of place in the middle of nowhere. We approached cautiously, and that's when we noticed something even more disturbing. A small makeshift campsite nearby with a few old belongings and a collapsed tent. The area had an eerie feel, and the air was heavy, as if holding on to secrets of a past long forgotten. We explored the site, finding little in the way of identification. Just a few household items and some weathered tools. It seemed whoever had been there had left in a hurry or hadn't planned to leave at all. Feeling a mix of intrigue and discomfort, we decided to head back to our campsite. But the find had changed the atmosphere for us. The isolation of our campsite, once comforting, now felt oppressive and heavy. As night fell again, the metallic scraping resumed, echoing around the valley with no discernible origin. Unable to sleep and spooked by the sounds and our earlier discovery, we packed up at first light, cutting our trip short. The hike back to our car was quiet, each of us lost in thought about the forgotten car and campsite, wondering about the story behind them. We reported our findings to the local authorities, but as far as I know, nothing ever came of it. The valley, with its pristine beauty, had a shadow over it now. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.